In February 2013, Sly Cooper came home after 8 years away. 8 years of fans wondering if the raccoon thief they grew up with was ever coming back. He returned. New game, new studio, new story. And for a moment, it felt like everything was going to be okay. Then the game ended. Sly was stranded in ancient Egypt, separated from his gang, separated from everything. The developers had planned a DLC episode to bring him home. Sony cancelled it. And that was the last time anyone saw Sly Cooper. No big finale, no emotional goodbye, just silence. Since then, a film was announced and quietly buried. A television series was revealed to the world and then vanished without a single frame ever being shown. The studio that created him told us recently that barely 1 in 10 of their employees would even want to go back. And the studio that tried to continue his story was shut down 4 months ago. Sly Cooper didn't retire. He didn't get cancelled. He didn't fade out gracefully like so many PlayStation mascots before him. He disappeared. And the full story is far more tragic than most people realize. In 1997, a software engineer named Chris Zimmerman sat at his desk at Microsoft and made a decision. He was good at his job, the pay was fine, the career path was clear, and yet he was completely miserable. Zimmerman was a gamer. He had always been a gamer, and somewhere between the spreadsheets and the product meetings, he had come to the conclusion that making productivity software for the rest of his life was not something he was prepared to do. He went to 2 colleagues, Brian Fleming and Bruce Oberg, and told them he wanted to start a video game company. They said yes almost immediately. They brought in 3 more, Darryl Plank, Tom Saxton, and Kathy Saxton. And in October 1997, 6 people walked away from one of the most stable employers in America to go make games in Bellevue, Washington. They needed a name. Zimmerman brought a shortlist home to his wife. She looked it over and told him she didn't mind what they chose as long as it wasn't Sucker Punch. That was all he needed to hear. Their first game was Rocket, Robot on Wheels, a Nintendo 64 platformer released in 1999. Charming, technically accomplished, reviewed well, and almost completely ignored. The timing was brutal. The Nintendo 64 was already in its final years, the PlayStation was dominating, and a small game from an unknown studio barely registered. But it was enough to prove they could ship something, enough to get a meeting. In 2000, Sucker Punch signed exclusively with Sony, and they started building something new. This was the PlayStation 2 era, and if you were a gamer in the early 2000s, you already know what that means. The PS2 was the most successful games console ever made. It wasn't just winning the hardware war, it was completely redefining what video games could be to a new generation of young people. And at the center of that world was the mascot platformer. Crash Bandicoot's golden era under Naughty Dog had come and gone. Jak and Daxter had just launched. Ratchet and Clank were months away. The PS2 platformer was the genre that mattered, and Sony knew it. Sucker Punch wanted a piece of it, but they had a problem. They wanted to build a game around a thief, a proper thief, charming, skilled, living outside the law, the kind of character you'd find in a heist film. Cool under pressure, always 3 steps ahead, but nobody had ever successfully made a criminal the hero of a family platformer before, because a thief is a criminal and children aren't supposed to root for criminals. The writing team worked the problem until they found the answer. Sly Cooper would only steal from other criminals. The Cooper clan, a long dynasty of master thieves stretching back through history, had built their entire code around it. They took from the people who deserved to lose what they had, like Robin Hood with a striped tail and a cane. And that one decision reframed everything. The world built around him matched the character completely. While Ratchet was blasting across alien planets and Jak was sprinting through seamless open jungles, Sly moved differently. Quietly. Every level was a puzzle as much as a platform. Guards had patrol patterns to memorize. Shadows offered cover. One wrong move and it was over. Sly could only take a single hit before he went down. The official US PlayStation magazine would later describe it as a mix between one-hit kill arcade action and Splinter Cell sneaking. While most platformers of the era chased chaos and slapstick, Sly Cooper carried himself with unusual restraint. Jazz music, stealth, heists, rooftop silhouettes at midnight. Even as a kid, it felt cool in a way few platformers did. The visual style was its own kind of statement, cel-shaded and film noir tinged, rendered like a Saturday morning cartoon that felt like true cinema. The gang's hideout, the Binocucom, Bentley running tactical support through an earpiece, nervous and brilliant, Murray, all heart, all muscle, deeply loyal, and Carmelita Fox, the Interpol inspector who pursued Sly across the world, furious at what he was, unable to stop caring about who he was. It wasn't just a game with good mechanics, it had an ensemble, characters with history and warmth and genuine relationships. You weren't just playing a level, you were part of something. Nate Fox, who designed and wrote the first game, and would go on to shape every Sly story that followed, later said the team genuinely didn't know if anyone would want it. He called it a wacko game, an unproven studio building something that didn't fit neatly into any category, hoping the world was ready for a raccoon thief with a cane and a code of honor. The world was ready. Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus launched in September 2002. It sold over 1 million copies. For a small studio operating on a tight budget, that wasn't just a commercial result. It was proof. Proof that the character worked. Proof that the world they'd built had room to grow. They had no idea yet just how right they were. The first game had proven the concept. Now, Sucker Punch had to prove it wasn't a fluke. Sly 2, Band of Thieves, arrived in September 2004, and from the moment it launched, it was clear that something had changed. Not just improved, fundamentally rethought. The first game had been a linear platformer. Height levels, one character, get to the end. Sly 2 threw that blueprint out entirely. The world opened up. Each chapter dropped the Cooper gang into a sprawling hub environment. Paris rooftops, an Indian palace, a Canadian logging operation, and gave you the freedom to move through it however you wanted. Bentley and Murray became fully playable for the first time. Sly handled the stealth, Bentley handled the infiltration, Murray handled anything that needed to be hit very hard. 3 characters, 3 playstyles, 1 gang pulling one job together. Brian Fleming, the studio's co-founder and producer, said the team had landed on a single premise early in development that guided everything. Sly and the gang worked together to pull off a string of big heists. That was it. That was the whole game, and they never lost sight of it. The influence was deliberate. Nate Fox described the heists as being drawn from classic Hollywood, the kind of movies where every member of the crew has a role, where the plan always goes sideways in the third act, where the tension comes not from the combat, but from the execution. Sly 2 felt less like a platformer and more like a caper, a game that trusted its audience to care about the characters enough to invest in the plan before the chaos began. It worked. Critically, it was embraced as a significant step forward from the original. Fans regarded it then, and regard it now, as the pinnacle of what the series could be. To this day, if you ask a Sly Cooper fan which game they'd hand to someone who had never played the series, the answer is almost always Sly 2. Sly 3, Honor Among Thieves, followed in September 2005. The ambition grew again. New playable characters joined the game, vehicles, multiplayer, a 3D mode that required special glasses packed in with the game. The story pulled threads of the entire trilogy together. Sly's family history, the Cooper Vault, the cost of a life spent outside the law. It was a conclusion, a proper one, and it landed with the weight of something genuinely earned. 3 games, and a world that had grown richer with each entry. By any measure, Sucker Punch had done what almost no small studio manages to do. They had built a trilogy with a beginning, a middle, and an end. A character who felt complete. A story that had been told. But the sales figure estimates suggest a different story entirely. Sly 1 had sold over 1 million copies. Sly 2 sold just under 1 million. Sly 3 sold around 720,000. Each game reviewed as well or better than the last. Each game received with genuine enthusiasm by the people who played it, and each game reaching fewer people than the one before. Nobody talked about it publicly, there was no alarm raised, no crisis meeting reported, but inside Sony, the numbers said what the reviews didn't. The audience for Sly Cooper was loyal, it just wasn't growing. For a franchise to survive, loyalty isn't enough. You need new people walking through the door. They weren't. Here is the thing about Sucker Punch that makes what happened next so difficult to process. They didn't abandon Sly Cooper, not in any dramatic, public, deliberate sense. There was no falling out with Sony, no creative crisis, no moment where someone stood up in a meeting and said, the character was finished. What happened was more subtle than that. By 2005, the studio had been living inside Sly Cooper's world for the better part of 5 years. 3 games with the same character, the same gang, the same universe, refined and expanded. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, the people who built him had started to wonder what else they were capable of. The PlayStation 3 was coming, and with it, a completely different kind of game. The PS3 represented a generational leap that had felt genuinely seismic at the time. More power, more scale, open worlds that had previously been impossible were suddenly within reach. And Sucker Punch, a studio that believed story and presentation mattered enormously, but that fun was more important than both, looked at what the new hardware could do and felt something pull at them. They wanted to make an open world game, a human game, something grounded and serious and morally complicated in a way that a cartoon raccoon thief, however beloved, could never quite be. The concept that emerged was initially described internally as a superhero version of Animal Crossing. It would evolve over years of development into Infamous, an open world game set in a devastated American city, built around a man who had accidentally become something more than human and had to decide what to do about it. Dark, ambitious, completely unlike anything Sucker Punch had made before. Sly Cooper was a children's game. Infamous was not, and the studio that had built one was now entirely focused on the other. This wasn't a betrayal, this was evolution. A small studio of talented people looking at a new generation of hardware and asking themselves what they were truly capable of. That's not an uncommon story in the industry, and in most cases, it's the right call. Studios that stay comfortable don't grow. Sucker Punch wanted to grow, but growth has consequences. The question of what happened to Sly Cooper was answered not with a statement, but with a silence. No farewell tour, no final words on the character's future, just a studio moving forward. Stepping through a door into a different kind of ambition, making a different kind of game for a different kind of audience. Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus had launched in 2002, with Nate Fox terrified that nobody would want a wacko game about a raccoon thief. By the time Infamous entered development, that wacko game had 1 million fans and no one making the next one. Sony still owned the IP, the character still existed, but the people who understood him, who had invented his voice and his world and his code of honor, were gone. And Sony faced a choice. Let Sly Cooper disappear quietly, or hand him to someone else and hope for the best. They chose to hand him over. Sanzaru Games was not an obvious choice. In 2010, when Sony began looking for a studio to carry Sly Cooper forward, Sanzaru were a small team based in San Jose, California, with a modest portfolio and almost no public profile. They had made a handful of minor titles. They were not, by any conventional measure, the kind of studio you hand a beloved franchise to. But they had something that mattered more than a portfolio. They loved Sly Cooper. Genuinely, deeply, personally. These were people who had grown up with the games, who understood the character not as an intellectual property to be managed, but as something that had meant something to them. When the opportunity came to work on a remaster of the original trilogy for PlayStation 3, they approached it with the kind of care that only comes from that kind of intimate knowledge of the character and world. The Sly Collection launched in November 2010. 3 games remastered in high definition with trophy support packaged together on a single disc. Sucker Punch publicly praised it. Brian Fleming called Sanzaru's work spectacular, and tucked quietly into the collection, almost as an afterthought, was a teaser. A glimpse of something new, a suggestion that the story wasn't finished. It wasn't a trailer, it wasn't an announcement, just enough to make people wonder. Sony had seen enough. They gave Sanzaru the franchise. What followed was years of development on a game that carried more weight than any of its makers probably fully understood. Sly Cooper, Thieves in Time, was not just the 4th game in a series. It was an answer to a question that fans had been asking for nearly 8 years. It was proof the character still had a future, and it was being built by a team that had never made anything close to this scale before. Thieves in Time arrived in February 2013, and it brought Sly back with genuine affection. The cel-shaded world was intact. The banter between Sly, Bentley, and Murray felt warm and earned. The concept? Traveling through time to meet Sly's ancestors, each one a different kind of thief from a different era, was inventive and gave the game a variety that kept it moving. Critics responded positively, an 80 on Metacritic, a respectable return for a franchise that had been silent since 2005. But the fans were more complicated. Some loved it, some found it too easy, too safe, too content to coast on the goodwill of the trilogy rather than push anywhere genuinely new. And then there was Penelope. Penelope had been introduced in Sly 3 as Bentley's love interest. A mouse, a mechanical genius, a genuine addition to the game. In Thieves of Time, she returned as a traitor, working against the Cooper gang for reasons that felt thin and unconvincing to many who had invested in her character. It was the kind of story decision that divides a fanbase permanently. Half the audience accepted it, the other half never forgave it. For some fans, it wasn't just divisive. It fundamentally broke one of the emotional pillars Sly 3 had spent years building. But none of those debates would become the defining legacy of Thieves in Time. Not the difficulty, not the divided reaction, not even Penelope. The thing people ultimately remembered was the ending, because Thieves in Time did not conclude Sly Cooper's story. It stranded it. The game closed with Sly trapped in ancient Egypt, separated from his gang, separated from his own time, stranded somewhere he had no way out of. It was a cliffhanger, deliberately, consciously constructed as an opening for what came next. Sanzaru had already planned it. Egypt was going to be a DLC episode. The story would continue, Sly would come home. Sony cancelled the DLC before a single piece of it was made. The director of Sanzaru later confirmed it publicly. Egypt was the intention. That was always where the story was going, and they never got to finish it. So the game that was supposed to bring Sly Cooper back instead left him more lost than he had ever been, stranded in a time and place he didn't belong, with no follow-up coming, no resolution planned, and a fan base that had waited nearly 8 years only to be handed a story with no ending. The last heist had gone wrong, and nobody was coming to fix it. In January 2014, something unexpected happened. Sony announced a Sly Cooper animated film. For a fan base that had been sitting with an unresolved cliffhanger for almost a year, it felt like a lifeline. Not a new game, but something. Proof that the character still mattered. Proof that somebody somewhere still believed in him. A teaser trailer dropped alongside the announcement. The animation had changed, CG rather than the cel shading the games were known for. But the gang was intact. Sly, Bentley, Murray, the Cooper clan, a global heist story based on the original game. The studio behind it was Rainmaker Entertainment, the same Vancouver animation house that had produced Escape from Planet Earth. The director was Kevin Munro, who had previously directed the 2007 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles animated film. Sony and Sucker Punch were both involved in an advisory capacity, with the producers confirming that they were working closely with the original creators to make sure the film stayed true to the franchise. There was one complication. Kevin Munro was also simultaneously directing the Ratchet & Clank film. Both projects were running at the same time, at the same studio, with the same director. Sly Cooper was always going to have to wait its turn. So it waited. By WonderCon 2016, Munro confirmed that the Sly Cooper film hadn't entered full production yet. It was still in development, still waiting, and the reason it was waiting was sitting in cinemas across the world, hemorrhaging money. The Ratchet & Clank film opened in April 2016. It had a $20 million budget. It made $14.4 million worldwide. The opening weekend placed it 7th at the box office, behind The Jungle Book, which was in its 3rd week of release. Ticket sales dropped 70% the following weekend. Rainmaker Studios took a $10 million impairment charge on the project. And just like that, the Sly Cooper film was over. The cancellation didn't happen all at once. For a while, the project simply stopped moving. In September 2016, Rainmaker's president said publicly that the Ratchet failure had forced them to rethink the timing, the budget, the entire approach. Munro said he hadn't worked on Sly Cooper in nearly a year and a half. The momentum was gone. The belief was gone. And by the end of 2017, Rainmaker exited the project entirely, selling back the rights, leaving the film without a studio, without a director, without a future. The film that was supposed to give Sly Cooper a second life had been killed. Not by anything wrong with Sly Cooper, but by a different PlayStation game's failure at the box office. He hadn't even been given the chance to fail on his own terms. But Sony wasn't finished. Not quite. In June 2017, the same month Rainmaker walked away, an announcement arrived. A Sly Cooper animated television series was in development. 52 episodes, 11 minutes each. Technicolor Animation Productions in Paris handling production. PGS Entertainment managing distribution. The series was real. It had studios attached. It had an episode count. It had scheduled premiere dates. The first 26 episodes were listed for October 2019. The remaining 26 for July 2020. Fans dared to hope again. The premiere dates came and went. October 2019, nothing. July 2020, nothing. No episodes, no footage, no official explanation. The release dates had appeared briefly on a website and then had been quietly removed within days of being discovered, as though someone had made a mistake by letting them be seen at all. Since then, silence. The series had been removed from both the Technicolor and PGS Entertainment websites. No statement has ever been made about its cancellation. No footage has ever been publicly shown. It simply ceased to exist in any visible form. 52 episodes of a Sly Cooper television series were announced to the world, and not 1 second of it has ever been seen. By 2022, Sucker Punch had spent years avoiding the subject of Sly Cooper almost entirely. Not out of resentment, the studio had simply outgrown the franchise that once defined it. When the questions came, and they always came, the answers were careful, measured. The kind of answer that leaves a door technically open, while making very clear that nobody is walking through it anytime soon. In July 2022, Sucker Punch made it official. A blog post, published on the franchise's 20th anniversary, contained a statement that fans had probably already suspected, but had never had confirmed in writing. No studio was currently working on a Sly Cooper project. Sucker Punch had no plans to revisit the franchise, and no other developer had been assigned to it. The character that had launched the studio, the raccoon thief with the cane and the code, 20 years old, and with nothing to show for the second half of his life but an unresolved cliffhanger and a television series that had evaporated without explanation. But there was still Sucker Punch, still the people who had built him, and as long as they existed, as long as Brian Fleming and Nate Fox were still there, still making games, still carrying the institutional memory of who Sly Cooper was and why he mattered, there was always the possibility, however remote, however theoretical. Then came the Min-Max interview. In September 2025, Nate Fox sat down with journalist Ben Hansen. The conversation covered a lot of ground. And then Hansen asked the question that Sly Cooper fans had been waiting years for someone to ask directly. What percentage of Sucker Punch employees would actually be excited to make a new Sly Cooper game? Fox didn't hesitate.
What percentage of the studio would say, yeah?
10%?
What?
10%. Hansen expressed shock. Fox elaborated. It had been a long time. The studio had moved on. Ghost of Tsushima had defined a new era for Sucker Punch, had found a new audience, had established a new identity for the studio that had nothing to do with a cartoon raccoon thief on the PlayStation 2. The people who loved Sly Cooper were still there, but they were outnumbered 9-1 by people who had never made a Sly Cooper game and had no particular desire to. 10%. It was the most honest thing anyone connected to Sucker Punch had ever said about Sly Cooper's future, and it was devastating. 4 months later, something else happened, something that received far less attention than it deserved. On January 13th, 2026, Meta shut down Sanzaru Games, the studio that carried Sly Cooper when Sucker Punch wouldn't, the team that had loved the franchise enough to spend years rebuilding it, the people who had planned the Egypt DLC, who had known how the story was supposed to end, who held in their heads the resolution that fans had been waiting 13 years to see. Gone. Absorbed into Facebook's virtual reality ambitions and then discarded when those ambitions collapsed. Whatever Sanzaru knew about where Sly Cooper's story was going, it left with them. And then, in December 2025, Brian Fleming announced that he was stepping down as studio head of Sucker Punch after nearly 3 decades. Through Rocket, Robot on Wheels, through the entire Sly Cooper trilogy, through Infamous, through Ghosts of Tsushima, Fleming was moving on. The last founding father of Sly Cooper's studio, passing the keys to a new generation of leadership that had grown up making entirely different kinds of games. The institutional memory was fading. The people who remembered why Sly mattered were leaving. And the studio that remained, talented, successful, celebrated, had a different identity now. One built on samurai open worlds and cinematic action, not cartoon raccoons and gentlemen thieves. Sony still owns Sly Cooper. The IP is protected. The games are still available. The original trilogy was re-released digitally on PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 as recently as June 2024. Someone at Sony still believes the name has value. Sucker Punch still hides Easter eggs. Ghosts of Tsushima contains a full hidden tribute to Sly Cooper, a secret trophy that requires players to dress like him. A love letter written in the language of a studio that remembers where it came from, even if it can't go back. And Brian Fleming, in one of his final interviews before stepping down, said, "Never say never," that whatever came next, whether it was continuing Ghost or returning to Sly, the decision was limited only by the studio's commitment to focus and time, that they could only do one thing at a time, but that the door wasn't closed. But doors that are never officially closed can still be impossible to walk through. Sly Cooper had been stranded in ancient Egypt since February 2013. The studio that tried to continue his story no longer exists. The film that could have introduced him to a new generation was killed before it was made. The television series announced to the world vanished without a trace, and the man who built him told us that barely 1 in 10 people in his studio would even want to go back. That is not a death. There has been no funeral, no announcement, no farewell. It's something quieter than that. Over time, Sly Cooper had stopped feeling like a franchise that had ended and started feeling like one that had simply disappeared. Somewhere in ancient Egypt, Sly Cooper is still waiting for the next page of the story, and after 13 years, it's getting harder to believe anyone is ever going to close this chapter. Now it's time for the Dandana Squidz Discussion, where you get to share your thoughts and opinions on this topic. Do you still believe Sly Cooper's coming back? Or is this the end of the road for the gentleman thief? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one and love the passion you guys have for these games. And if you've been enjoying these deep dives into the games we grew up with and want to support even more of them, becoming a member of the Squid Squad genuinely helps the channel more than you probably realize. Different tiers, great perks, early released content, behind the scenes footage, the ability to influence the topics we talk about, and to connect with me directly. Click the join button down below for more info. Thank you so much for watching to the end. It means more to me than you know. Much love, squad. I'll see you in the next one.